Hi. I am Bobby. I am a robot cat. As promised, I have listened to the entire 1 hour and 50-minute leaked meeting between Steve McRae and Cheshire. I was sure to listen to the video Steve himself posted, so as not to be accused of bias by the overtly sensitive graying mantis. Never mind. I shall deliver to you a play-by-play, with no opinion of my own. While it is impossible to reenact the meeting in its entirety, I shall deliver all pertinent arguments on both sides, to allow you to receive the information without wasting near 2 hours of your time. Let us begin. The panel consists of Chris, Steve, a bloke by the name of Dapper Dinosaur, Cheshire, and Manya the Golden Unicorn. At the time of viewing, the video has just over 2,000 views and 55 likes. Chris starts the meeting off with introductions, naming Steve and Cheshire, and naming the others as witnesses to the meeting. Chris states he mediates professionally. However, he is mediating this situation pro bono and claims he is neutral, but does cite he considers Steve a friend, but does not believe that will affect the outcome. Manu asks if they are streaming. Chris ensures they are not. Chris states there is an expectation of confidentiality, and sets rules for the meeting. After laying out the rules, he asks Steve if he has any questions, to which Steve responds with no. However, Cheshire did have questions. She states she does not agree the video should be for personal use only, on the grounds that she feels it is only fair for the moderators specifically to be allowed to hear the entirety of their meeting. Steve rebuts with a simple statement that he does not agree. Over-talking begins. Chris asks if they can agree to attempt to resolve before discussing the release of the video. Cheshire agrees but insists it is on record she does not feel this is fair. Chris states that he has received background prior to this from Steve. He then addresses Cheshire. Cheshire states she wants to achieve mutual understanding, as opposed to a resolution for the time being. Steve states he wants to achieve a mutual and fair resolution in this meeting. Chris states there seems to be a misunderstanding in agreements. Cheshire agrees that is a fair statement. Chris asks what her understanding of their agreement was. Cheshire expresses 50-50. Chris asks for clarification of this understanding. Cheshire specifies that the agreement between she and Steve was 50-50 ownership of the channel and profits, stating Steve has said this for 2.5 years. Steve disagrees, stating she refers to it as his channel and that he has final say. Steve brings up conversations she previously had with Red's Retrek in privacy, to which he claims she stated it is Steve's channel solely. Chris asks the two of them if they can agree that this is clearly a misunderstanding based on many factors, citing that he knows them both and does not feel either would do this to the other purposefully. Steve responds with yes. Cheshire states as of the prior night that she would say no. This is not the case. Chris asks if there is a resolution. Is there a middle ground? Both state there could be a resolution. Chris makes a suggestion based of notes he has drafted. He points out that they are in different countries, which creates tax complications, as well as other issues. He suggests Steve retain ownership and Cheshire remain an independent contractor, allowing Steve to have final say, suggesting they utilize this format moving forward, and come to third-party mediation for future issues. Steve agrees with all except the third-party bit. He states there is no meeting of the minds and wishes for better communication. Cheshire states they have had multiple conversations between themselves and Boole, and the agreement was that Cheshire and Steve would continue to run the channel together, with Boole also receiving a portion. However, unfortunately Boole has passed away. She states with Boole gone it removed the third-party factor, but there was no change in discussion on channel sharing between the two. She then states she has a recording of Steve stating they were in a 50-50 partnership. Cheshire states she is okay with making changes and negotiating, but reiterates Steve told her they were 50-50 but that she would be billed as an employee for other reasons on paper. She states she was okay with this, but it is now not the case. Steve responds. He acknowledges most of it is correct. He had her down as a subcontractor and a manager. He states he never gave her final say. Again claiming he has stated this to multiple people. Due to taxes he reiterates his decision to add her as a subcontractor. He then states the 50-50 was for profit involved, not entire profits and income. And he was always under the impression he owns the channel solely and she is simply an employee, further explaining her pay was to come out of net income. Chris states they are closer to an agreement than they think. Chris states employee status would not be agreeable to Cheshire. Cheshire states she would take the employee status, despite tax hit. As she calculated what Steve owes her for all previous work over the course of 2.5 years. And the tax payout would be well worth the profit. Steve interjects with confusion multiple times. Chris asks Cheshire to clarify. Cheshire also suggests severance pay. Cheshire also states she does not want ownership of the channel. She states it is problematic that Steve is taking her respect for him and using it against her. Yet, she assumed the respect was mutual. Chris discusses business responsibility and his experience in past mediations. Cheshire states that once Boole passed away, the third-party position was taken over by Red's rhetoric. Cheshire states she suggested many times to find a new third party when Reds allegedly stepped away. Steve interjects to reveal that Reds has been making decisions for the channel the entire time. Cheshire responds in surprise and Manu interjects. Manu backs that they were unaware that Reds still had any power within the construct of the channel. There is a small argument. Cheshire states this is now an issue of conflict of interest. Cheshire circles back to the 50-50 again, stating that this was what she understood, and that the agreement was in good faith. Steve maintains that this never happened, and the 50-50 was only about the profits for time spent. Manu interjects and reiterates they all understand that the channel belongs to Steve, and reiterates Cheshire was told it was to be 50-50 in both decisions and financials. Chris shuts Manu down on the grounds that too many speaking is confusing. Chris attempts to change topic. Cheshire continues to discuss the 2.5 years she has invested, and asks for at least a title of what purpose she served over this time. Chris states the ownership is not being disputed, and suggests simply calling the 50-50 argument a simple misunderstanding and moving on. Chris suggests they simply change and agree moving forward. Chris suggests splitting the channel into responsibilities. Cheshire states she has contingent as to the distribution of work, stating there was a meeting of the minds the night prior, and Steve also agreed they were 50-50. She reiterates she does not want ownership of the channel. She states the context matters and their channel is their channel in the sense they worked together on it. Steve bypasses her stating it is not her channel, and continues to insist it is only his channel. Steve states she is being dishonest and he never agreed to her terms of 50-50. He states he is willing to negotiate only on compensation. Steve cites a miscommunication the night before. Cheshire clarifies her stance on decision-making. She claims when she and Steve discussed financials, he gave her the green light for 50-50 of the entire worth of the channel. She also reiterates yet again she does not want the channel as an owner. She then states she never gave him entire control over all work, art, and other parts of the channel. That she fairly assumed she was also part of decision-making, as Steve included her in most all of the channel's direction and resurrection for the entirety of their relationship. She cites all of the PR work she has done for him and that he is taking advantage of her friendship. Steve states he would never give up any control of the channel, and he will remain the final decision maker. Cheshire claims she has an audio recording of Steve stating that all decision making is equal. Manu interjects to clarify and attempt to reassure him he owns the channel, but Cheshire will not agree with 100% decision making on Steve's part. Cheshire claims that she wants a resolution. However, she no longer trusts Steve as she has accumulated dozens of times he has publicly and privately stated they were 50-50 on all fronts, and he is now denying it. She states that if he has 100% control, yet expects her services, she does not trust compensation. Cheshire asks for a resolution for payment for all past work. Steve states any work Cheshire did in his favor that was not directly on the Non Sequitur show channel, over the last 2 years, is irrelevant, and he is only willing to compensate her for the short time the NSS channel has been back into his possession. Chris and Steve silence Manya. Chris asks Chesh for her suggestion for a compromise. She states she wants to be compensated for past work. That Steve retains veto power, and any work moving forward she should be compensated at a fixed rate that could fluctuate depending on the work as agreed. Chris asks if there is a way to 50-50 profit share and fixed periods to prevent her being fired by Steve. Cheshire states after 2 years of work for Steve, and in Steve's favor, if he maintains 100% control he could veto or change her work at any time. She states he is vetoing what is and is not payable income. Steve states that if he pays out 50-50 she is responsible for 50% of channel costs. Chris suggests Steve pay off the $5,000 he paid out, back to himself. And then from the split profits. Arguments of semantics continue. Steve attempts to explain that money goes back into the channel. Cheshire questions if Steve is supposed to receive money from the Kyle settlement. Steve claims he does not know if he will ever get that money owed. The two agree they cannot communicate fairly at this point. The discussion on the semantics of the $5,000 settlement continues for some time, the general synopsis being that Chesh feels that he is cutting her pay to compensate for loss related to Kyle and to benefit himself. Manya does attempt to interject many times. Chris shuts her down most all of the time. Cheshire states she was told she was allowed to bring Manya in as an advocate. Steve rebuts. Manya states there is no resolving this as both parties continue to talk past one another. And she and Steve agree that this partnership will not work. Cheshire becomes emotional as she expresses that she feels she has been treated quite unfairly. Cheshire asks to share her breakdown of the amount of work she was doing. Steve argues with her. Cheshire asks for Chris to mediate and Chris sides with Steve. They bypass the work recap for the time being. Steve states he shall not budge on his intention of only paying Cheshire for 2 months of work, at a 50-50 rate, after what he feels should go back into the channel. Cheshire states she has performed PR, management and community management for Steve for 2 years. She states it is unfair after she has worked so hard for his channel. Steve laughs at her. Cheshire states she should like to leave the interview. Chris finally attempts to mediate again, trying to explain to Steve that she feels her work is important. They call for a break. Upon their return, Chris states he truly feels that they are close to a resolution. Steve speaks and is clearly agitated. He states he needs actual numbers of what she wants paid to her. Chesh asks for clarification on the $5,000, stating it appears he is paying himself the money out of the channel, and wonders where that $5,000 will go if and when Kyle repays it, stating that Steve seems to be using money meant for Chesh to recover his own expenses. Steve states if and when the $5,000 comes back to him from Kyle, that he will pay her half. They go back to agreeing that Chesh has a 50% claim to the residual money. But Steve is currently using channel money to recover that before Kyle pays out the amount. The meeting then takes a turn as they both argue over who has been treated more poorly by the other. Chris finally mutes all and asks for them to agree to be more mindful of one another. Steve immediately continues to whinge that he has been treated poorly. More arguments ensue over interrupting and being treated poorly. Cheshire finally returns to numbers. She displays the low average salary of the positions she held for Steve, ultimately coming to a number of $120,000 as an example of the amount of work she has done. She itemizes all of her artwork commissions, merchandise design, thumbnails, and other works to drive the point home. She states the minimum she has earned in the months only on the NSS show. She should be owed $4,570 just for the show itself and related work. This does not include the 2+ years of work she has done for Steve. Steve attempts to respond. Cheshire states she would prefer Chris share his thoughts. Chris allows Steve to talk anyway. Steve states this is what Kyle did to him and berates Cheshire's numbers. And states the very idea is ridiculous. He returns to his plan to only pay her for 2 months. Cheshire reminds him she did give a number for the 2 months. Manya points out that Steve stated she is an independent contractor, so she should be paid according to her going rate. Steve talks over everyone for some time. Chris states he feels they've made progress. He then suggests they table the conversation for 48 hours. Then he should like to speak to each privately. Steve states he wants out of the situation and is not comfortable. Cheshire again asks him to claim what he is asking to negotiate, as everything has been non-negotiable. And points out he is demanding a number, and then laughing at the number. More arguments on the previous mod meeting continued. At the 1 hour and 24-minute mark, the dinosaur in the corner finally speaks. Dapper Dinosaur briefly discusses the Kyle kerfuffle. He points out that Steve made the claim he was laboring falsely for the show, only to be proper screwed by Kyle. And he appears to be doing the very same thing to Cheshire. He states he feels it is fair for Cheshire to be compensated for her work. Chris corrects him that it would only apply if there was a physical contract in place. Steve corrects the dinosaur that it is not the same, as Kyle refused to pay at all, and he is willing to pay. Dapper Dinosaur reiterates that if someone labors for another, under a false belief, that she should be compensated. Steve continues to interrupt him. Steve then suggests Chris speak to Red's rhetoric, which Cheshire feels is a massive bias. Steve claims this is time wasted, and he needs an amount. Cheshire states Red's rhetoric has a conflict of interest, and she feels that Chris is biasly taking Steve's interpretation of the agreement over top of hers. Steve and Cheshire further argue over Red's rhetoric, the moderator's involvement, and unfairness on both sides. Cheshire becomes quite flustered. She asks to discuss the meeting's privacy. Steve gets quite upset over this, and feels she wants to weaponize the meeting if it is made public. He then moves to weaponize Red's rhetoric against Cheshire. Chris states that he would like to wait 48 hours, and then discuss things individually. Manya, Steve, and Cheshire overtalk one another further on the topic of releasing the meeting instead of keeping it in privacy. Cheshire states clearly she recorded the event for her own purposes. Chris asks Cheshire to wait 48 hours to attempt to resolve before releasing the meeting to the public. Chris discusses with the group on the privacy and handling the issue in matters of explaining outcomes. Chris expresses his confidence again that there seems to be room for resolve. Steve accuses Cheshire of possibly releasing a manipulated version of the meeting. Steve suddenly becomes fearful, and states he requires removal from the relationship for his own safety and reputation. Chris asks Cheshire to come up with a fair figure to resolve their issue. The meeting ends with reiteration from Steve that he no longer wishes to work with Cheshire. Chris asks for privacy. Steve rambles. Cheshire suggested removing her from the show, as well as they mutually removing one another as moderators on their respective channels. Finally, Cheshire makes a note that she is not comfortable with Steve continuing to attempt to add Reds to the situation, as he and Cheshire stated, and it did not end well. And with that, the meeting was ended by Chris. My dear viewers, I shall continue to bring updates to this ever-evolving kerfuffle. Cheers.